Tēnā tātou ki raro te tūnui o tō tātou whare e tuaki nei ko tai tēnei ki te wā. Ko tai tēnei ki te wā kia tukuna atu tō tātou inoi ki tō tātou matunui te rangi. Kia whai te haere o ngā mahi katoa kei mui a tātou. Urere kare mā, e tū tātou. Urere kei inoi tātou. E te atua ka harawa he tuku whakamui me te anō tēnei ki a koe mō manaakitanga. Mō manaakitanga kia uwhe koe ki nungi kia mātou katoa i tēnei wā manaakitia mai mātou. Manaakitia mai mātou i roto i ngā mahi katoa whakaurangia. Whakaurangia mātou i roto i ngā māuitanga nau hoki te kā. Nau hoki te kā, nau hoki te kroria ki tau i ngā tapu. Āmeni kia tātou. E noho kia tātou. Timatanga mai ko te kupukote atua no tau kupu i te timatatanga. Tō tātou piringa ka puta kaora. E ki nei te rangi me te whenua i tōna krooriatanga. He honore he kroria ki te atua, he maungarongo kirimi ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata o te ao katoa. Ngā kaunui ana ki te mihi ati ki tō tātou ki ngi tū heitia, pō tutau te whero te tua whetu e noho nei, kirimi ki te ahurewa tapo o na tupuna o na mātua. E whakatau ana te wāhanga ki roto ki ngā mana whenua o konei, ngā te whātua, tainui waka, tēnei ka mihi. E whakatau ana te wāhanga ki tō tātou kuroa, a Papa Joe, o ngaro atu i te tirohanga kanohi, o taka te pō ki runga ki tō tātou maunga, a taka para whau, nōrere te whānau, tēnei anō, a tautoko ake ki a koutou. Ki tō tātou amukura. Tātou anō hoki te hungore e tau nei tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou ko tai mai nei ki te tautoko hoki te kaupapa. Ko te kaupapa, kia whakarangatira i tō tātou tuahine me tōna tūranga. Me tōna tūranga kia whakawhiti atu mai te ahonuku, tai noa ki te ahorangi. Tēnei ka mihi atu kia koutou ko tai mai. Liz, tēnei anō, tōrā. Kia tai mai te iwi marenga ki mui a koe kia whakanuia. Nō reira, Liz, tēnei te mihi atu kia koe. Anō nei te tautoko ake, ia tātou ki rā, e ngā pai maunga, e ngā aua, e haere mai nei i tēnei rangi tēnā koutou. Are tēnei te tōro hoki ngā kōrero mīkau ake, matariki kia tātou. E mihi matariki kia tātou, e kare mā. Kia hoki ngā mahara, kia huri ngā whakaro, kia whakaritia ngā rā, kei mui a tātou, e tēnei a whitu o tātou hiu o te rangi. Kia te tiroa ke tātou ki ngā moe o tātou katoa, kei mui a tātou. Nō reira, tēnei anō, kia whakatoa te tōhanga kia matariki. Anō nei te ira tangata, tātou anō te tāne, te wahine, tēnei anō kamihi atu kia tātou e kare mā. Imali, koutou hoki rai ngā kai whakahaere o tēnei kaupapa nui o tātou i tēnei ahi, tēnei kamihi atu kia koutou kia kā. Kia mai, kia manoa nui ki te mahi ake i ngā mahi hei oranga mō tātou katoa. Nō reira kia amohia ake te oranga o te tangata, ka whiti ki te whai au ki te ao mārama. Tēnā koutou, ka tira tēnā rā tātou katoa. Tātou te kanohi ora, o rātou māpua e ki te pō. Tēnā koutou, ka tira tēnā rā tātou katoa. Tēnei wā kia tukuna te wahanga kia koe, e te rangatira, Alan Bartley. Tēnā koe.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Alan Bartley. I'm the head of the School of Counselling, Human Services and Social Work, Te Kura Tauwhiro Tangata. And and it's my honor this evening to welcome you all to Professor Beddoe's inaugural professorial lecture. Liz actually employed me in my very first permanent academic position way back in the Auckland College of Education days as one of the embedded sociologists in the social work program. Because yes, with respect, I am not a social worker, nor am I a counselor, nor indeed am I a member of any of the professions that are served by the programs in our school. But I would be doing my own profession a disservice if I didn't point out in this occasion that Liz was very nearly a sociologist herself. That close. Liz was a sociology major in the BA program at the University of Auckland. And depending on which stories you hear or listen to, you might imagine that her minor was either drama or improv theater or stand-up comedy, or perhaps even just having a good time. But she did eventually graduate with that BA in sociology, and was confronted with the question that face sociology majors the world over, which of course is, what sort of job will a sociology degree get me? But as she was nearing her graduation, she did line up several job interviews, one of which was at a large and prominent market research firm in Auckland, where she was interviewing with one of the managing partners, and by Liz's account, the interview did not go very well, largely because, well, in Liz's telling, largely because, the managing partner presented himself as you would have expected a white middle-class managing partner of a large market research firm in Auckland to present himself. And anyway, at some point in the interview, he said to Liz, I don't think that you're the right person for this sort of work. You're a little bit too much of a lefty. Maybe you should try social work. As it turns out, that was the other interview that she had lined up, and she successfully got that role. Back in the day when, in fact, social workers were not required to have a social work qualification to be employed. We fixed that one. But she did get a social work qualification. She went down to Victoria in Wellington and got her MSW applied, and worked in health social work for 14 years. And during all of that time, Liz demonstrated a very strong commitment to the social work profession, as illustrated by the fact that she was the chief executive of the professional association, the ANZASW, for a period of time, and she was appointed by a Minister of Social Development to the Inaugural Social Workers Registration Board, where she was responsible for helping to set up the policies and the frameworks that govern the board to this day, and served on the professional standards committee for a term as well. On the basis of some of that extensive experience, she did find her way into the social work education program at the Auckland College of Education, and virtually immediately stepped into the role as the head of the Centre for Social Work at the time. And that was in 1990, in the mid-1990s, and then was also appointed as an associate dean for applied social sciences, and she held that role until the amalgamation with the University of Auckland in 2005, or when the ink was finally dry. So she was, in fact, she served as the inaugural head of the School of Counselling, Human Services and Social Work as well. anybody who knows Liz knows that she is a prodigious researcher. She has this relentlessly restless energy. And in fact, anybody who's traveled with her to conferences knows this. You know, while the rest of us are looking for the pub, Liz is looking for a quiet place to get some writing done. This energy manifests itself in an enormous workload of research and of writing and of publishing and of editing. Amongst other things, she's the editor of the Aotearoa New Zealand Social Work Journal. Having worked with Liz on a number of different research projects now, I can attest to the fact that Liz's research interests are varied and vast. But they are connected by a couple of really important threads, and one of those is a very keen, a very dedicated commitment to the advancement and the development of the profession of social work. Another is Liz has a really strong sociological imagination, and that's characterized by a critical analysis of the social, of social structures, of social processes, and a commitment to social justice, particularly in the ways in which those social structures and those social processes impact on individuals, on whānau, on communities, and particularly those who are more marginalized and disadvantaged by them. Which just goes to show, in fact, that you can take the girl out of sociology, but once ignited, that sociological imagination is impossible to extinguish. So, without further ado, it's my very great honor to introduce to you and to turn the floor over to Professor Liz Beddoe.
I was talking to people before this and saying that this is probably one of the scariest talks I've had to do, which is very strange, but it just feels different to the many, many other talks and keynote addresses I've given over the years. And I don't quite know why that is, but I guess it's because it's an inaugural. It's a sense it's supposed to be a beginning of something, but in many ways, and I think an inaugural for a professor is, oh God, we made it, we got to this point. And so there are mixed feelings about it. I also said to Alan when we were having the prep discussion about how he would introduce me that would save him a lot of time during my retirement speech, because as you can see, I'm quite a late starter. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my inaugural, I was briefly, I guess, influenced by a letter that I had from the then Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, John Morrow, who said, you should have fun in your inaugural. It's not about your pet research. You can actually talk about the things that you want to talk about. And I thought, right, okay, well, John Morrow's given me permission. I'm going to go for it. And so I decided... That's right. And so I decided that really what I wanted to do was kind of draw together some of the strands of my career, which, as Alan said, I started off in sociology, ended up in social work somewhat accidentally. In fact, I think most of my career has been somewhat accidental, but here I am. And so what I wanted to do was talk about social work education, because that is really one of my preoccupations. It's not my only research, but it's been something that's really kind of, I think I wrote my first article about social work education in 1998 or something. So as you can see, I've been around for a while. Okay. So I have a whakatauki, and I chose this whakatauki because I think it speaks to knowledge and the world, and the way that knowledge in the world brings us light in dark days. So it felt like it was a really nice one for this time of year. Te manu e kai ana I te mero no nā tita nā here, te manu e kai ana I te mātauranga no nā te au. The bird who partakes in the meroberry owns the forest. The bird who partakes of education owns the world. And for me, that's like really speaks to how I feel about education still after all these years, that it is about letting light into that forest, seeing the treasures that are there, seeing the taonga, seeing the things that feed us and nurture us, and wanting those things to be bound up in the knowledge that we impart as teachers. So, some acknowledgements. Henry Giraud for inspiration for this talk. Caitlin Merriman for the art, my daughter. John Derrick, who's here for some of the photos. Thank you, John. I didn't ask you again if I could use your photos, but I'm sure it will be fine. And colleagues and friends here, and students, you know, current and former students, for the many kindnesses and challenges that I've had over the years. And as Alan said, I want to acknowledge the sociological imagination, because without the sociology degree, I would have been able to perhaps speak in Middle English to you to do my talk, but it wouldn't have been quite the same as it will be tonight. So my aim is to explore some of the challenges of educating for social justice and social work. So we think about our lives being sort of bounded by the families, the communities, the heart of what we do. And I love this painting from my daughter, really of this home with people, and it's lit because of the love and the people that are in that home and in that place. And I said, you know, I was talking before about how cold it is in this room, but there are many, many warm hearts, and I hope our warm hearts will warm the space. So, in the abstract, which I wrote ages ago, and as everyone knows, you write an abstract and then you go to the conference and think, oh, I have to talk about that. But I actually still feel quite good about this one, because there are three interconnected forces that challenge the preparation of social workers in this time that we're in now. There's the impact of neoliberal ideology on the higher education environment, and I think we could all talk about that in this room for like 2 hours and not stop. The erosion of confidence in social work as a social justice profession, and the emergence of contemporary populism across the globe. Now, for me, those things are connected, so I may not actually address them in a nice, orderly fashion, but they're the strands, I think, that bring together what I want to talk about. So why do I think social work education is a site of struggle? There are a whole lot of different things. First of all, there's a real overemphasis on social work as statutory child protection. And in that focus, there's often an invisibilisation of the rest of us who don't work in child protection. The people who work in NGOs, the people who work in health, in the community, in so many different settings. The 75% of registered social workers, approximately, who don't work in child protection. But child protection is so dominant, so public. I'm not going to talk about that very much, but I just think it's important to note that. My practice was in health. I worked in women's health, older adults, palliative care, chest medicine, you name it, I worked there in health. Secondly, there is a focus in social work about the content of what's taught. There is currently a very big, major focus on brains, on neuroscience, on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and what I call and many other people call the trauma industry, that focuses on a very narrow, very individualised way of thinking about social problems, which I think is dangerous and limiting for the profession. There's a focus on fixing individuals to avoid future liability, sometimes forward liability, which is a phrase that I saw when I went to a conference, and there were some people from the Productivity Commission who were talking about this future liability, and it took me a while to figure out what that meant. And then I meant that if you don't do it right with your kids, you're going to cost us all money later. And that has infected, that thinking infects policy, and what infects policy infects practice. There's the ongoing inequity of funding for social work education. We're still funded as if we're going to just, I don't know, teach Chaucer or something, which is great. I did Chaucer, I love Chaucer. But, it's not very labour intensive teaching about Chaucer or Icelandic studies. you could probably have lots of fun, but actually teaching social work, there's a whole lot of practical stuff we have to do. There's practicum, there's teaching skills, there's understanding whether the people that we're teaching have got the skills they need to be able to be safe and work in our communities with our whānau. There's a sort of a dullness and poverty of ideas often in social work administration, and I hear this from people in social work administration. So I apologise if anyone feels that they are an administrator, because I'm sure if you're here at my talk, you're not one of those dull people. But there is that sort of poverty of ideas. There's an idea that research in social work is a bit of a luxury, pampered academics, all those long holidays. And all of us know that sort of sinking feeling that you have when a student says, "Did you enjoy your holidays?" after the mid-year break when all you did was, you know, this sort of thing. And preparing your Canvas page by the 4th of July, and all of those other things, if you're not still marking. There's also, I think, a thing that worries me a great deal, which is sort of anti-intellectualism, that social work is just common sense. You know, anyone could do it. Someone said that to me once. Surely anyone could do social work if they're a nice person, because it's just common sense. Well, let me tell you, I have a thing about common sense. Common sense, when said by politicians, is a very dangerous concept. And in this, I acknowledge the fabulous essay by Stuart Hall and Alan O'Shea from 2013 on common sense, which I totally recommend people read. Common sense is, it's kind of, when people invoke common sense, they mean do it like I do it. So it's often, you know, sorry, I might upset people with a pale, male and stale, but you know, if people are telling you about common sense, it's usually the way to do things that most would benefit their demographic profile, right? It's about shaping opinion, not reflecting it. And often people think common sense is natural. It comes from nature. It arises in nature, and therefore it must be good. But actually, it may arise in conversations and discourse, but it's often really interestingly positioned against expert knowledge, and it's about whose knowledge that counts. Sometimes it's used very selectively to talk about a particular kind of knowledge that the speaker wants to promote. So we do have to think about common sense, because we have to challenge the sort of uncritical adoption of things like neuroscience into practice by policymakers who then infect practice. And these kind of seemingly unrelated trends of using knowledge in particular ways, of focusing on particular aspects of the human state, they tend to create this kind of vicious circle of capitalist ideology. So policy, it isn't just or socially just or even well evidenced, despite the rhetoric. You know, you'd always hear legislators talking about policy-informed practice, but when you talk to people who work in those places in Wellington, those canyons of the terrace, they will often say it's you know, policy-informed evidence, because actually what we do is we pick the evidence that suits us in order to create the policy that we want. So what happens is you get this kind of weird policy, and then you get this adopted by social workers who often aren't well enough trained to critique this kind of thing, and then they get training by trainers who aren't up to date. And often that's no fault of the trainers, because we live with a publishing industry that locks up most of the new knowledge. So there's a lot of things there. And then we rinse and repeat. And it doesn't matter which party's in government, we rinse and repeat. Okay, so this erosion of our profession, decades of this kind of policy has dampened our critical faculties and quieted our voices. Despite our optimism that social work professionalisation would bring benefits. I was there right in the start of it, and I had great hopes. But I've been quite disappointed. I think we're still very rooted in conservatism. We didn't get what we were told we would get, which would be a lot more support for social work education, a lot more support for the profession. We didn't get the resources that were going to lead to a lively research culture in the profession. None of that's changed, and we've had the legislation for almost 20 years. So I'm very disappointed about that. There isn't an increase in postgraduate work that we'd like to see, though I am immensely proud of our PhD program in our school, and immensely proud of all of the students who I work with on their research, who are doing fantastic things. But there should be at least twice as many or 3 times as many of them. I think the contracting environment has had an impact on silencing us in the NGOs. And social workers have lost a sense of that resistance of collective action. And we don't often even know our rights. And I see John in the audience, who I know who writes and thinks a lot about social workers and social action and what we can do to sort of resist some of the things. So where do we go from here? Well, personally, I think, and I'm completely biased, but there's my chance I can be totally biased here. I think the thing we need to do for the next generation of social workers is to think about critical social theory underpinning everything we teach. So whatever we're doing, we have that in our minds, that we are thinking critically about the world in which we do this practice. Because it cannot in any way be imagined as being apolitical or neutral. There's no room for neutrality in what we do. A critical education is vital at this crisis point that we're in at the moment, and I do think New Zealand is in a crisis. Understanding critical theory supports resistance to the sort of dominant, individualised and technical rational social policy discourse that really infects so much of what we do. And it's hard to think, you can say, oh, well, you know, I don't like this policy, but we've got to do it. What you need is the skills to actually critique it, to unpack it. So when somebody gives you a lecture on ACEs, what you should be doing is doing ACEs checklists in your classroom or wherever you are. Find out about what that means, challenge it, look at it, poke a hole in it. And I know I don't want to expose one of my PhD students at the moment who's writing a fantastic thesis. Any day now will be submitted on the whole way that knowledge is used in practice and the way this kind of policy trickles down to practice, often with misinformation and is not critically analysed. We need to move past that. This requires a certain amount of courage and determination. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about 3 professors in the University of Neoliberia, which is my favourite way of describing the University of Auckland when I'm on Twitter. I'll have to change it. A disclaimer, I have lovely professor colleagues. None of these professors are my colleagues. But we are all these professors, and you will recognise things. All of us in this, who are in education will recognise aspects of these 3 professors. Right, Professor Grimm. This is me most days this semester, right? She's tired, she's stressed, she feels unproductive. She knows it's not just her, because even when you actually bump into someone in the corridor occasionally, we all feel the same. She worries about her research outputs. She tries to keep her focus on students and keeping their admin processes at bay. She's grumpy that her research has gone on the back burner. She has no time for politics. She's grim. Professor in between. He's tired. He's worried about the calls for political neutrality in the classroom. He worries about laws that would force policies of partisan balance in hiring at public universities. It's by Jennifer Greenfield, who's a lefty social work academic in the US, writing at the beginning of the Trump era. And what she feared happened. You know, there were bans on teaching certain things in American universities, and that ban on teaching certain things, especially critical race theory, has infected universities around the world. He wants to keep his record clean and preserve his grants record. He leaves his activism behind, but he misses something. There's something missing in his world. Professor Radical Hope comes in. She's tired. We're all tired. But she can't keep quiet. She finds ways to kindle optimism. And I like what Henry Giroux, from his lovely talk in 2020, it is impossible to be radical without being optimistic. And that, I think, is something you kind of need a little mantra in your head in this climate that we're in. Okay, so where do we go from here? What do we do? COVID-19's been a really profound experience in many, many ways, so many ways. I think that at times of challenge and crisis, we do adapt as we can. We've needed to isolate at times when we need other people. It's fed the resurgence of right-wing populism, and it's brought this challenge of the masses of mis and disinformation that we're struggling with. We need to organise to protest at a time when we're asked to stay home. And it's been hard to stay connected with each other, despite the unprecedented connectivity of the technology that we've used. And I do think there's a lot of work for all of us to do, wherever we are, whatever kind of work we're doing right now, to think about how we can gain those connections, how we can build those connections again, because it has been very isolating. And that impact is on social work education as everywhere. So, I always like this, we have to teach the stuff that universities hate. I think our university is probably not as bad as many in the world in terms of, I do feel we do have a certain amount of academic freedom. I think we fight hard to retain that academic freedom. It gets very complicated. As we know, there are very complicated arguments about free speech. But nonetheless, we want to be able to challenge our own institutions as well, because it's easy to stand here and criticise other institutions, but we need to look at our own. So, can we be neutral? Well, my argument is no, we can't be neutral. We can't be neutral in this place now when we have disproportionate incarceration of tangata whenua and all of the other things that we know, the health disparities. We can't be neutral when there are attacks on reproductive justice everywhere. We can't be neutral when our streets, schools and health services are not safe for transgender people. We can't be neutral when the deeply misogynist, racist, homophobic right is building power bases within fundamentalist communities and churches in this country right now. This is not some frightening thing that's happening over there. This is happening right now. So we need to really think about whether it's safe to be neutral. We need to understand that even the things we thought we'd fought for, we cannot rely on those staying safe. We need to be really vigilant. We know that right now anyone who speaks up on certain issues, particularly if they're Māori or they're women, is likely to be attacked. So we need to support each other and build community so that we can keep each other safe in fighting some of the stuff that's happening. And it happens in our classrooms. We can't pretend that our classrooms are all safe, because they're not. They're not safe. We know they're not safe always for transgender students. We know they're not safe for students who have different religions and different belief systems. So we need to think about that. Okay, Voss argued that fundamentalists or populist leaders often build on that frustration and alienation that people have. And what we see often is that populism, and nothing has given us more of an example of that in recent memory than the campaigns that we saw culminating in Parliament earlier this year. That there's, I love that, false facts. Dubious sources, outright lies, unethical, amoral and aggressive and discriminatory behaviour previously not tolerated. We see that in the misogynist attacks on the Prime Minister. It's, it appalls me the extent to which that kind of speech has become mainstream. It is really horrible to think about that. We know that, for example, our own colleagues in this university are facing attacks. Some of them are really frightening. There are threats made, there is language used that is terrifying. We have to speak out to this. Because what's happening is populism is speaking to the anxieties and fears. And the thing is, if you repeat those things often enough, people start to believe them. So there are probably people who do genuinely believe that, the Prime Minister is, you know, in some sort of massive cult that is going to bring down capitalism and, you know, I don't know, say any more about that. Anyway, so we need to rattle cages. We need to rattle student cages, because we do hear students saying things that tell us that sometimes they have been affected by some of this fake news. We need to give them the academic skills and practice in both domains. And, you know, one of the things that we don't do here, and I think there's some really interesting work being done in the US around giving people that civic literacy, that they understand how the voting system works, that they understand how the ballot box is really important. And I don't think that's something we've been doing in New Zealand social work education. It's something we need to have a think about. And again, civic literacy dies in the midst of fake news. Literacy, and I would say civility as well. Like civility dies in this fake news. So we do need to be thinking about how we can educate future practitioners so that, you know, like maybe even 1% of social work graduates go into politics in some way, participate in political life, whether that's as you know, as an MP or a councillor, and most of the rest of them participate in some kind of politics. That politics isn't something over there that we don't think about, that it's every day. Okay, so we need to foster collective action, and you know, Professor Radical Hope thinks that we should basically be supporting much more collective action than we do at the moment. We need to be out there in the streets and actually supporting our students to be there. When I first started in social work education in the 90s, it was a matter of trying to keep the students at Epsom, because they were always going off on protest. Sorry, we can't come to class on Monday. Now it's kind of thing, what do we have to go to a protest? We've got a class. So we need to foster collective action again. There's a lot to do. We need to think about employing critical race theory and intersectional lenses in what we teach and how we teach. It's not just about telling people about it, it's also about doing it, about making relationships with community that actually enable us to develop working relationships. We need to think about white privilege a lot more than we do in the institution and within the profession. There is a lot to do. Okay, we also need to remember that some of the things that are under threat at the moment, that can be the many, many things that are under the general banner of reproductive justice, are hugely important. We need to preserve our rights in that area, and we need to have those conversations and talk about those things that we have tended not to talk about for a long time. We need to learn how to support social justice campaigns. There is a lot happening. That was a successful campaign that looked at police patrols. We need to think about incarceration. We need to think about abolition movements. We need to engage with the ideas of abolition of prisons, but also abolition of the child protection system, which is picking up a pace in the US at the moment. The system doesn't work. It never has worked, and it's not working. Okay, we need to be better allies. We need to think about the campaigns that we can support. We can't do everything, but between us we can do a lot. We need to think very, very hard about how we can support campaigns that will manifestly improve the lives of Māori in our world. And that starts with, I think, thinking about land back and what that means, and building from there about all of the services and supports that we need to put in place, and we need to think about decision making and power. And one thing I've learned a lot, I teach quite a lot about health. One thing I've learned over the last year is there is nothing more powerful in this land than a Māori woman who has a mission to keep her whānau safe. That's what we should be supporting. That's where we need to be, putting our weight, putting our support, leaving the stage open for those voices, for those powerful Māori women to get out there and do what they've done in many communities across the land over the last 2 years and before. So, a return to radical hope. Hope means that you believe another future is possible. If you don't have hope, you become complicitous. Wise words. I'm going to wrap up now with a poem from the Ivory Tower. I told you I had a poem, Alan. Okay. Whew. Grim endurance has held sway for some time. Strive, 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 stop and be counted. Teach, 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 pause and be rated. Write, 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 wait, wait and wait and wait and be reviewed. Speak up, speak loud, speak truth. Quiet, be policed. Think of the brand. Speak up, speak loud, speak truth to power. But be careful. The malevolence does not rest. In the hate cave, John's string of numbers watches, insults and threats at the ready. On the Facebook page, the angry Christian snarls that speaking up about misogyny is unprofessional. I thought better of you. In the counting tower, Jane's string of platitudes composes the next "there is no alternative" statement. In the studio, the revolution is being edited. In the warehouse, the nameless ones dream of process and flow, and the deadlines. Oh yes, the deadlines. There's the lash. In the murky shadows, hope stirs. She's not quite ready to face another dawn. Rise up to be counted. The emails lurk. A gentle reminder. I get a lot of those gentle reminders of this and that. This request, that. A list, such a long list. Yet, I consent to be counted. I consent to be measured. I consent to be rated and labelled. Did I have a choice? Yet, I do not consent to be extinguished. I am hope still.
Kia ora, Liz. Ina mana, ina reo, ina karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Mark Beddoe toko ingoa, ki te toko ora o te kura akaranga mai te tāwharo tangata. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Beddoe, I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education and Social Work, and it's my role here to thank Liz for that fantastic inaugural address. I have to just go slightly off script and say I've known Liz for a very, very long time. A lot longer than she's been here or I've been here, and that was because Harold and I worked together at Tāmaki College when I started as the head of science there. Harold was in the English department and we became good friends there, and Liz came along with that package before Caitlin was born and all those things, so it's been a long time. And then when I was working in medical and health sciences, And Liz was battling the bureaucracy, particularly the then Vice-Chancellor academic, the dreaded Raywin Dalziel. She and I formed various partnerships to get things happening in the social work education that we could make happen through medical and health sciences that couldn't happen here for some unknown reason. Anyway, so it's been a while. So it's a pleasure to be part of this, to listen to this. I want to just talk a little bit about inaugural lectures because, you know, they are a thing. And as Liz said, you know, she was a bit nervous about doing an inaugural lecture, and rightly so, really, because inaugural lectures are the end of a very, very long tradition that started in the medieval university when Western universities were first being formed. The inaugural lecture was part of the process of becoming a professor, but it was actually preceded by the new professor spending vast sums of money entertaining all of her colleagues with lashings of food and drink. So we'll look forward to that, Liz. But actually, I think you'll be grateful that we sort of swung it around a little bit, and now the university puts on at least a little bit of hospitality, and then you can do your inaugural lecture. But the inaugural lecture is the one part of that ritual that survived. So I think this evening, what we've done is we have all participated in an event that has a very, very long history. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me that this evening, Liz has played a remarkable role in continuing that tradition. Congratulations, Liz. I ask you all to join with me once more to thank Liz for a marvellous So all it remains is me to thank you all very much for your attendance on this very cold evening, and please stay and have a few words with Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.